Hello and welcome to MotorInc First. We've not traveled anywhere. The bikes come to us. And this is something that has been around for a few months, a month or so at least.
Yeah, I think the press rides were early. Logistics conflicted with our schedule, so we couldn't go. So it came to us.
So this is the Ultraviolette F77 Mach 2.
Yeah.
Just with the name, I must say that I have certain expectations and that this is going to be racy and okay, wait. I'm just going to put it out there what I think because I have also obviously stayed away from not just talking to you, from everything else. Just by the sound of it, to me, and the Ultraviolette was anyways an expensive motorcycle, that this will be a high performance version of it. Is that it?
I will say two things to you.
Okay.
First, Ultraviolette as a company is a little bombastic in its communication, nomenclature, naming things, as you will see. So first, when they say words like Mach 2, you shouldn't take it too seriously.
Okay.
That's specific to Ultraviolette. Specific to the electric vehicle startup two-wheeler industry, nothing moves as fast as it should. And keeping expectations really low or not at all is a far smarter thing than to expect a lot. And I'm not saying this as a
I
negative.
just like how politely he said.
No. I'm not saying this as a negative. I'm saying this as this should be the expectation. Because I'll tell you why, okay? You know, and we know now that electric vehicles do a lot of software based on a lot of hardware. Most electric startups are very happy to iterate the software a lot. But if you spot problems with hardware, then it doesn't iterate quite that fast.
Okay.
So software numbers will change, software features will change, prices may change, names will definitely change, new colors will come. But will they fix fundamental hardware? I would keep the expectation at no, they won't. And when somebody like Ultraviolette surprises you with the Mach 2, you should be thankful that they did.
So, 1 second. So, would it be easier to just say Ultraviolette F77 version 2.0?
No, this would be Ultraviolette F77 Mach 1 being the original. This is 1.0102 maybe.
Okay.
Now, let's get the hardware out of the way first. They have just done a few small things.
Okay.
They have optimized these battery packs further. I don't have details, but in the process, you get 20 kilometers of range more on the IDC cycle from both. Not that we thought that the lack of range was the issue, but you have a little bit more now. That's change number one.
So the battery packs are effectively the same. It's just a
little bit more range.
Okay.
And it could be a software update. It could be a slight change in the battery spec, whatever it is. 20 kilometers more range. And these are respectable ranged motorcycles.
Correct.
The 10 kilowatt hour thing does 323 kilometers of IDC range, which is excellent. Okay. That doesn't translate to the real world, which we'll come to. But 323 as a promise, it's a good promise. No stress about that. Second, when I rode the Mach 1, as it were, the frame was a weak spot. Because, for example, when you come down the curly flyover, that turn, it's a little bumpy. You'd commit to the turn and then you'd see the bumps and then you close the throttle and feel the chassis feel like a spring flexing and all of that. And it isn't a great chassis anyway, because the battery pack size compromises the chassis, which we'll discuss in detail. They've fixed some of those issues. So the steering head area is much stiffer and they've tweaked the torsional rigidity of the frame also. So together, it felt like a lot better motorcycle. I'm still very, very, very strongly struggling to call it a sports bike, because what a average modern sports bike can do, the F77 cannot.
Okay.
The problem is the size of the battery pack, and it compromises many things. We'll come to it.
Yeah.
This in fundamentals is the change in the hardware spec. All of the rest of the changes are software.
So power is the same? Power, torque, all of that same. No change to that. Okay then.
So in the software, one, like Ather did, they've also deployed traction control.
All right.
And on an electric, traction control is very easy to do in the sense of put two wheel sensors in, which the Ultraviolette already had because it has ABS. So it's a very simple system. And like with all electrics, their advantages, these systems have no moving components as it were. So you can ramp up traction control really quickly. So it can come in really quickly. I rode about, I'm going to say 155, 60 kilometers, most of it on wet roads in the rain. And it was in the rain mode, which is traction control was in T3, which is what they suggest you should use in the rain. And the few times I did manage to activate it, it's not instant. There is a little bit of lag. I didn't think of it as upsetting. but it arrives and then it's a little heavy-handed. But this was the most heavy-handed traction control mode. I didn't get dry roads often enough to be able to try out the other two traction control modes, and you can turn
which are more lenient.
And I couldn't turn it off fully either because of the wet road. So when this bike comes for the view story, then we'll explore traction control fully. Does it work? Yes. T3, the rain mode, it's a little bit heavy-handed, but it's okay.
Okay.
No crisis.
This presumes that it has an IMU.
No. This is a very simple system. It's comparing two wheel speeds, just like the Ather Rizta does.
Okay.
These are the wheel speeds. That's rotating at 50. Why is that rotating at 75? Cut part. Simple.
So it's that simple.
It's that simple. It's a very basic system. It is unaware of what the bike's alignment in 3D spaces. It's not cornering.
So no chance of cornering ABS and
it's basic traction control, which for a motorcycle with this kind of performance, okay, it's a heavy motorcycle, it's slightly difficult to manage and all of that. I understand why they did it. Most importantly, it's a very simple system. To the point where earlier F77 Mach 1s may be able to get traction control as a backward update.
Correct.
I'm not sure if it is a priced update or a non-priced update. I don't have clarity on that, but what they said is everything that we've done for the Mark II can be rolled back and given to people who have bought the earlier Marks. I'm again not clear on whether they're intent on doing that or not. I will leave that in the pinned comment. I'll get an update from Ultraviolette and tell you if you have a Mac 1 today, should you get all the software updates from the Mac 2 or not. I'll tell you.
Okay. It's just that for me, in terms of a perception standpoint, I would automatically assume that it would be a more sophisticated system.
They can't. Look, the Ultraviolette's big challenge is already price. The more complicated they make this motorcycle, the harder it becomes to sell. Okay, and they're talking some very ambitious numbers, which we'll discuss at the end, but I don't think raising the price of the Ultraviolette in any way is a smart strategy, even if that means less equipment than more.
Okay.
And for what it's worth, Mark II is roughly 1 lakh rupees cheaper than the previous one, so they have adjusted the price already.
Oh.
So adding equipment, no chance. There is no hardware being added to this motorcycle, and not even in the foreseeable future as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, that's an important little fact.
Second, they've added 10 levels of regen, which sounds like a gimmick, I agree. And you've got the 4-way switch cube on the left, and you can use the left and right as a shortcut to adjust regen on the move. Now, the kind of rider who would adjust regen on the move a lot, I am unable to imagine it, but I did play with the regen. 10 is very strong, and you can switch it off. I found level 7 to be really useful, where I almost did single throttle opening and closing and managing most of my work. If I wasn't riding too aggressively, between 7 and 8, I was able to manage my braking. So they've done a good job with the regen also. It is predictable. Wow. Yeah. And 10 is strong, like engine braking strong. So when you close in 10, it dips. And by the time you get to 3s and 2s and 1s, it's basically freewheeling like an old 2-stroke. So there is a very nice range of regen, and it does make a difference to change modes. Will you notice 2 to 3? Not so much, but 2 to 4, you'll notice a difference. 2 to 5, bigger difference. 2 to 8, big difference. So it works as an idea. The shortcuts, I'm not convinced that they are a very useful thing to have, but at least the idea that, oh, I went to 10, I don't like it, I can go back to 9 without having to stop and go through the menus, it's good.
Okay.
No stress there. What Ultraviolette should have done, I think, is think about the dash a little bit more. It's a small TFT screen sitting in this giant plastic bezel. So first it looks down market. And I think Ultraviolette is so design sensitive that they can't see that modern design is simpler and clearer rather than complicated. They've got 2 design schemes now. The original one, which they call parallax. It is impossible to see the numbers on it because the background keeps moving around and stuff, you remember, and it's very hard to read. Yeah. And at first I thought because I'm 50 and I need reading glasses and all of that was the reason I couldn't figure out how many kilometers into the trip I was. And then I realized it's not the issue, it's just too small. Then they have another version which is slightly better. It's called Radar, which takes inspiration from aircraft radars. As I said, this is a bombastic company that says these weird things. They didn't need to do it, but they've done it. And it's equally hard to read because while the graphics are more restrained, they're still very colorful and the font sizes don't go up in size in the process. And I think the font sizes can't go up in the process because if they were to raise trip data, odometer data to a slightly larger readable size, then that thing is too small. If I'm not mistaken, TFT screens are generally rectangular, but they decide to cut the corners of the screen, so they've also shortchanged themselves on space.
It's an angular kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and they've also done some things that you'll get used to, but I think is kind of odd. For example, the traction control light is an LED indicator on the bezel, but the TPMS light is a smaller indicator in the screen. And therefore, they look very similar to you from a distance because they're both orange circular indicators with the Tyre thing. and it gets kind of confusing. The tire pressure monitoring system is an optional accessory for about 3,000-4,000 rupees, and on our test bike it was consistently overreading the front a lot, the rear a little, and therefore I got continuous abnormal reading warnings constantly. What I really liked about the warnings is it is audible and it is loud enough. So even with earplugs, I would always know that the bike was trying to tell me something, which is useful. But the TPMS wasn't.
What is the frequency of it?
Frequency
of the warning that it's giving?
I think it gives you 3 or 4 warnings and then it shuts up for a while.
Okay.
Then it comes back and gives you 3 or 4 more warnings and shuts up for a while. And every time I rode hard, if I ride hard for 10 minutes, the warnings would come. I think the problem was we set up our calibrated gauge to set what 30 and 32 or whatever they wanted, but it overread that. So when the tire pressure started to go up as the tire gained heat, it went into the alarm zone and then it basically went nuts.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, before you move forward, earlier it didn't have regen?
It had 3 levels of regen earlier.
Okay.
Now it is 10 levels of regen.
What are the ride modes? Eco, normal, sport?
This is ultraviolet. You cannot have eco, normal and sport. It's glide, combat and ballistic.
Glide, combat and ballistic. So normal is combat.
Normal is combat and it's a very good mode.
Okay.
And you can see the balance of it, and I don't like the balance of it. But what they've basically done is that the glide mode, which is their base mode, is extremely conservative. Okay, so it is fully range oriented, and this is where you'll see max range. What is nice about this mode is the performance is not so slow that you feel like it is tedious and dull.
Right.
There is just enough to get through traffic with enormous range coming when we had the 10 kilowatt hour battery pack. So there's literally always range left. So range anxiety on this bike is a very, very remote possibility.
Okay.
And then from glide to combat mode is a big step up in performance and a big drop in range.
Okay.
But ballistic, which has even more performance, is a very small delta.
In terms of performance?
In terms of performance and therefore also in terms of range.
Okay.
So in the user manual, Ultraviolet says we don't expect you to use ballistic constantly. And ballistic will give you maximum performance, optimizing battery, motor, etc., etc. But if you ride a lot in ballistic, I also like their motor state indicator. It's a small gray icon that says not armed. Green, motor is healthy, temperatures are fine, you can go for it. Orange, we are going a little bit hot. Maybe you want to be a little careful. And then red, which is hot. But because it's the motor that's heating up and not the battery, if you just calm down a little bit, the motor recovers and goes back to green after a while. So you can keep recovering the performance and enjoying more of it. So on my first day, I rode, I'm going to say about 97 kilometers in one go. And I constantly used ballistic, saw the motor overheat, went back into combat, rode a little bit more calmly for a while, and came back to ballistic again.
So I was going to ask you, did you manage to shut it down?
No. What I really love about the ultraviolets is even the last time on the Mark 1, getting it to properly overheat and say, okay, I am done with this shit and I will not let you do any more of this is next to impossible, and I really love it.
Actually, the reason why I didn't ask you that then was because this kind of communication is superb.
Yeah.
Because it's giving you gradations.
Yeah.
And it's telling you when you can intervene as a rider and control things.
Correct. What I would want them to change, honestly, is to move this indicator out into the LEDs rather than keep it in the screen.
Right.
Because spotting it on the screen, it used to be easier the last time. They've reorganized the modes a little bit, the layout a little bit, and now it's a little bit harder to spot because it sits right next to the regen indicator, which is a bunch of square blocks. This is also a bunch of square blocks. It's a little bit hard to read. Okay, but it is a good indicator, and I think many EVs should have it, especially if you're oriented towards a mode where there is performance. Having a heat state available to you as a warning allows you to go longer without reaching serious duration or cutting performance or saying these modes are not available, etc., etc. So I think that heat indicator is a great idea. I think the fact that they're straining the motor more than the battery is also a good idea. We saw this on the Ather Apex also. They also strain the motor. But a motor's heat recovery is far quicker than a battery's heat recovery. So you can go into that state and then recover from it within the same ride, which is awesome. Ballistic mode is genuinely fast. It is genuinely fun to use. You can go very, very quickly in that mode. And in traffic, short commutes, I think you'll never come out of ballistic if you're a sporty-minded rider.
Really?
And for people who are not that kind of sporty, even if you're in combat mode, there is so much performance that in the city, I don't think you'll notice it. What I think they've done, but they didn't explicitly say, is they've slightly tuned the ballistic mode. Because last time, in slower and slower traffic, there was a ramp up in performance. So when you just open the throttle, it won't give you a lot of it. And then suddenly it give you a lot of it. So I constantly kept going back and saying, okay, no, I want combat mode while I'm in slow traffic. And then when it starts to open up, I will manually select ballistic, because that variation in performance was not nice for me. This bike didn't have that problem. So they have moved a step forward on that also.
Okay.
And at that point, we've covered 90% of the story.
Okay.
Apart from this, the app has a few updates, which I'm not going to go into, but there's more stuff.
Okay, before you get to, okay. Quality? Because
quality has gone up. Yes, thank you for bringing it up. Quality has gone up. They've worked on the fit and finish of the plastics a little bit. They have worked on the plastic quality in some places, and they have a whole bunch of new colors, which they're classifying into 3 categories. There's the sporty categories with the really bright reds and yellows. Then there is the Batman category, which is a selection of grays and blacks. And there is the Apple/shiny category, which is one of the blues that you'll see on the screen for this story.
Okay.
So there are 9 colors now, and there's still 2 versions. The lower version with the 7 kWh battery pack, which is just called the F77, and then the Recon, which is the bigger model.
Okay. If I just want to, because since I haven't seen the bike, I just want to say, if I had to imagine quality levels to be up to the mark of, what would you draw a line to?
It's very hard to say, because there's nothing else covered in as much plastic as this bike, honestly.
Okay.
But if you were to imagine a current day KTM, this bike would be 10-15% behind it max, nothing more.
And the current switches?
Everything is good. I don't have I wouldn't nitpick about these kind of things.
The reason why I asked is because somehow for me recently in bikes where the experience felt like the biggest letdown was on the switchgear.
Oh, no. This bike's biggest letdown is the chassis. It has nothing to do with any of the rest of it. You'll be so let down by the chassis that the rest doesn't matter.
Okay.
And I'm honestly saying, I don't have a problem with the switchgear. I think the plastics do look better. But the chassis compromises so many things that this is like the minor part of the discussion.
Okay, so let's talk about the chassis.
Right. Now, to me, the biggest issue with the Ultraviolette is they've got such a great powertrain that it is also big in size. And because it's so huge, they can't really package it very well. So the Ultraviolette Mach 1 was a really tall, slightly fat motorcycle in the middle. So is this. And therefore, do you sit in what you'd consider a normal sporty position? You can't.
Why is that?
It's weird, okay? For example, every time I rode it, especially in the wet ones, the metal foot pegs got wet and my feet started to slip around on it. I realized the problem is that they are under my feet, so I can't brace forward or backward on them. So my feet just keep slipping off.
Got it.
And then when you go into the corners, you feel like, oh, I wish the foot pegs were a little bit further behind. Then I'd be in a more naturally sporty riding position. That's one. Because it's fat, now they put grip pads on the tank, which was the issue with the old one. It was a little slippery. Now you have grip. But when you want to hang off, then you realize that the tank comes back longer than you think. So you're a little bit stuck. Right? Then when you go like this, okay, it's not too bad, but it is heavy. The torsional changes that they made now mean when a bump arrives in the middle, and there's one flyover which I loved during testing because it's got a massive crest in the middle of it, because it basically goes like this in the middle of the turn and then rises quite a bit onto another surface, and the next surface is the grippy surface. So the bike arrives onto more grip, and it takes a lot of work from the suspension to be able to handle that. The Mach 2 handles it better than the last time. But the average sports bike will leave this thing for dust over that thing, because on the Aprilia RS457 or the RC390 or the R3, you basically wouldn't back off for this bump. But on the F77, you'd better back off. Okay. Because it's a lot of weight going over, and then it has to settle and all of that.
Tell me, when you're like, let's say, sitting in a kind of aggressive where you're hugging the bike and you're crouched over, does it feel wide?
Yeah. Very wide. Like old school sports bike kind of wide.
Okay.
So all our bikes are becoming narrower and more compact and more controlled, and the Ultraviolette battery is so big, which is what it gives the advantages of not overheating so much and the enormous range and all that, which is what I like the bike. But when you start to try and ride it like a sports bike, then it's in your way. And every time I've ridden it, I think if they were to take the same thing and put a normal handlebar on it, you'd get a slightly awkward street naked, but a far more effective motorcycle in the process. So, the control and precision of a sports bike that is so easily available today, and we are so fortunate to have it in our lives. Everything, the Ultraviolette doesn't match.
I think it's the origin of the bike. That's the issue.
Yeah.
Because they took the RC390.
Yeah.
Right? That was basically you could think of it as the start point.
Yeah.
In terms of where the wheels were, what the frame would be like, all of that. So they started that. They went with that direction. And when we rode it first time around, the battery pack was smaller. But since then to now, the battery pack has grown, which is why before you said it, I was just thinking, yeah, the reach for the bars for this would be longer than you would expect for something like this, and especially if you compare it to an RC where it started off.
Yeah.
Because I think that stance of the bike has changed with that battery pack and everything.
Yeah, and I think it gets further complicated because the battery pack and the motor take up so much space that the swing arm is actually really tiny.
It's really small, yeah.
Right, so that compromises some stuff, and then the amount of weight transfer that is happening because the battery pack raises your CG a little bit, it makes the motorcycle easier to lean. But every time you make a suspension movement or a throttle movement, there's a lot of weight that has to be managed, and the suspension isn't expensive enough or sophisticated enough or controlled enough to be able to do that successfully, which is why it feels like a blunt instrument rather than the surgical precision that I expect from a sports bike of this kind of expense today. Right? So the performance is there. In a straight line, it is impressive. In the turns, it's not a sports bike. It's an average street bike at best.
It sounds like an American muscle car. Like great in a straight line. When you come to the corner, hey, you want to watch it a bit.
Sort of, yeah. And I asked Ultraviolette, saying, if you had torsional tweaking done, if you had the neck stiffened and all of that, why didn't you just tweak the suspension too? And this is where my problems with Ultraviolette comes. And this is, our customers aren't complaining. Well, if you were to ask what the color of sunrise is, but the person you're asking is blind, then it's the wrong person to ask that question. They're not going to be able to answer it.
I think it goes back to that genesis, because for them to fix this, and what you said was absolutely right, in this entire structuring of the frame to accommodate the batteries and everything, what they ended up with was a really short swing arm. And they had to compromise that because the wheelbase was locked. So what they ended up with was a really short swing arm, and for them to bring out that stability and bring that sense of sophistication to it, they need a longer swing arm, which they can't do now. Which they can't do now without having to redesign the bike. And with the additional weight of the bigger battery pack, which is why I think that I hadn't thought about it because I've still not ridden it. That sense of unease in corners is that additional weight, I'm sure.
Yeah, it is. It is. And unfortunately, it's not mass centered enough for the weight to disappear in some situations. It's always there. And as long as you go down the highway on a straight and you're in ballistic mode or combat mode, and it feels great. I mean, there's no fundamental issue apart from the fact that you're sitting like this and you're beginning to hurt at the wrist, because this is a very committed riding position compared to, for example, the RC390 now. Right? It comes closer to the RS457's riding position than it does to the RC390. RC390 bars came up. RS came down. And the Ultraviolette is closer to the RS457 now. It's not a riding position you can hold for like a great length of time without suffering a little bit.
Does it get squirrely?
No, it's not. It's not squirrely. It's just imprecise.
No, what I mean is, like, let's say if the surface is a little uneven or if it's a bit loose, does it start to feel loose?
It's a blunt instrument. There is no feedback that is so precise that you can say all of these things or not. Right? So, for example, if on a rumble strip, you know how Mumbai rumble strips get, and there's gravel in the middle of it, and you're trying to go through that. It's not uncomfortable, but suspension-wise. But it's not precise suspension-wise. So it's a sense of something happened and I didn't feel that bump.
I hope to God the tires are excellent.
The tires are good enough. But it's like, imagine when you hit a bunch of bumps, sports bike, you're expecting to feel it. The Ultraviolette is actually rather good over this. But it's rather good in such a blunt way that you're not in admiration of it. You're just like, oh yeah, I don't know how it did that. And the suspension's constant attitude to bumps is, I don't know how I did that, but you should probably say thank you that I did. So everything gets absorbed. It's not uncomfortable suspension-wise. But does it feel sophisticated? No. Like, just to give you an example, the Speed 400, it absorbs everything and it feels sophisticated as it does it. It gives you feedback, it gives you control, and it gives you isolation. And it gives you that in a nice balance. The Himalayan is the god of all of this right now. This is just like, and then, okay, I don't know why I didn't feel that, but I didn't feel that, and we are okay.
I'm going to say this again. Suspension is one of the hardest things to do. And when you got a package like this, it's going to be hard. For sure.
I think increasingly that the electric startups focus so much on their powertrains that they forget the chassis has a role to play. But when you say, I'm going to make a scooter, and you don't give the hardware its due, you can still get away with it. When you make an electric motorcycle, then you decide to go aviation themed. And then on top of that, you say sports bike. Then I want precision. Right?
Aviation themed again.
The whole thing is aviation themed. And honestly, I understand it's their marketing and okay, whatever. But if you're constantly going to reference fighter jets, then you're going to reference a very precise, very, very powerful instrument. Then your product better talk to that. And it's a lot of things, this Ultraviolette, and impressive in so many ways, but a precision instrument it is not. Right? In fact, their throttle calibrations are precise. They are almost flawless. You can never trip up the throttle. But the chassis has nothing to do with that level of precision. And it requires fundamental rethinking of what suspension they have to use, because I don't think the current suspension units can be tuned to that level at all. It requires a more expensive suspension setup to be brought, which, if the motorcycle already is 4 lakh rupees, I don't think they can afford it, honestly. Okay, so this is what has happened with the Mach 2.
I'm just going to say that most people trip up on suspension, and most people will make that mistake because it seems like the simplest thing. Okay, you got wheels, you got to put shocks and basic calibration, and you're sorted. But that's not it.
No, and I'll give you an example. One of these electric vehicle companies spoke to a friend of mine who basically called me, and he was laughing in the night. Okay, we were on the phone in the night talking about something else, and he was laughing. He said, "Oh, those guys came." I said, "Yeah." They have actual RD350 shocks on their final frozen production bike. I said, "What do you mean actual RD350 shocks?" He says, "When I opened the unit, when you opened the springs," he said, "the springs, the dampers, everything, it's an RD350 unit." Now, an RD350 suspension wasn't considered sophisticated in 1974. Where's the question of it appearing sophisticated on a significantly heavier and longer, etc. machine in 2024?
I think there are lots of RD350 owners who's wondering, where are you getting new RD350 shocks from?
No.
Can we please know that?
Yeah. So if this bike had gone into production, and I don't think it has yet, but if this bike were to go into production, buy those shocks and put them on an RD350, at least get the same experience. I won't do that. I would go for something more sophisticated. But so I know that suspension is a blind spot. And in the Ultraviolette's case, I think the suspension is the last symptom of the problem. The major symptom is huge, heavy battery pack sitting in the middle of the motorcycle, occupying space that other critical parts of the handling structure would have used, and it can't do it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to belabor this point because we've already said this. You can see the F71 Mach 1 view on the MotorInc channel. We've more or less said the same thing. This motorcycle is, what to say, 15-20% better because of the extra stiffness. But outside of that, it feels exactly the same.
Just as a refresher for me, in terms of performance, what kind of horsepower does it have?
I'm going to say 35-36 bhp is what it feels like. Okay. I think the torque is there.
Yeah.
But the weight is also there. So it combines, and if you were to place it next to an RC390, the RC390 will go away from this bike a bit.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Charging?
It's the same as before. You get a standard charger. And then the boost charger, which is what we got with it, is a 3.3 kilowatt charger, which is 2.5 hours to 80% or something. Which sounds great, but it's a massive charger.
Yeah.
Ultraviolette suggests that you could buy the panniers and put this charger in your panniers and take it around. I don't think this is feasible. Between the last time that we spoke to them and now, they've also figured out a way to mount this charger to the wall. And it's a cage kind of thing, so you can open the cage and take the charger out, so you don't have to buy two chargers. Because the last time, it was just like a thing with handles. And something weighing 12-14 kilos with handles is not something that you can conveniently use, for example, if you live in an apartment block. Now they figured out a way to mount it to a wall. They also have what they call the Supernova network, which is their charger network. See, now we want Supernova.
How many chargers are there in that?
So they said they have, I'll put up the exact number, but there are some chargers on highways outside Bengaluru, some outside Pune, and some outside Chennai. These are the three places where dealerships have opened. I'll come to dealerships. And you can get 3 kilowatt charging, which is very similar to the boost charger, or 6 kilowatt charging, which is actually pretty fast. So which is, I think, 1.5 hours to 80% from zero or whatever. So currently the charging is free. They've not figured out what the pricing model is, and for the foreseeable future, it will continue to remain free. Now, in the bombast line, this is a joke that I love to make, so I'm going to please make it, kindly excuse. They're calling their dealership, the small dealerships, the space pod.
Space?
Pod.
Pod.
Pod. Okay. Not pottery. Pod. Oh. Right? And then the bigger dealerships are called the space station. So when Ultraviolette opens their first Turkish dealership, that would be the International Space Station. Okay then. Why Turkish? I think they announced a tie-up with somebody in Turkey and they're going to open a dealership there before they go into Europe and all of that. You know, they put one in that swimming pool thingy in Dubai. I just did not get what swimming pool in Dubai? What is this now? The deepest thing, not pool. Oh, there is that huge thing that goes down forever. Yeah. Huh? So but now there's an F77 sitting at the bottom of that. Maybe it handles better if the fluid around it is 40 times more dense than air. Look, their marketing I don't fully understand, and they're welcome to it. Honestly, it's no skin on my nose. Okay. Because they've done some weird marketing, so it's okay. Can we get to the price? You said it's 1 lakh rupees cheaper? 299 and 399. which are marked as introductory prices. So I don't know what they're
What is that's a 299 for the
for
7
the
kilowatt?
7 and 399 for the 10.
And this used to be 5 earlier?
This used to be one more. So it was ridiculously expensive. Now it's just very expensive.
Alrighty then.
Yeah. What else has changed? They announced a warranty program that got extended. So there's a 3-year, I'll put up the numbers. There's a 3-year warranty, there's a 5-year warranty. And the Recon has the 5-year warranty as standard. But you can now buy a 8-year, 8 lakh kilometer warranty on top of that.
Okay.
My advice to you is don't waste money on this warranty. Nobody's going to keep this bike for 8 years and 8 lakh kilometers. To me, the second tier, which is the 5-year warranty, is enough. If you do spend the money, Ultraviolette is gracious enough to allow the warranty to be transferred to every successive owner. It's not like the Bajaj warranty, which is first owner only. So if you buy the 8 lakh kilometer warranty, make sure that the guy pays you and compensates you for the fact that you're getting such a long warranty in the process.
Alrighty then.
Yeah.
Number one in a class of one.
I think fundamentally, I don't believe the batteries today and the batteries in the near foreseeable future are correct for motorcycles at all. I don't think it can be made. Okay. I'm hearing as of today that Torque Motors is going out of business. Another motorcycle maker. We tried the Oha Mantis. That was an utter and total disaster.
You did try the
We told the prototype, no? Remember? And then I came back and we said, I don't know why we are doing this because they're nowhere close to production. And then we finished that MotorInc First saying maybe they shouldn't go to production at all because this is not something that I want to be in production. This just makes no sense.
This was the one we'd seen at IBW, which was the defense connection
That
thing.
one, yeah. Right? I think after all of that talking, we rode it 50 meters and it was already overheating and it just didn't make any sense.
This was again Bengaluru at the
at Mecco, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
And in Ultraviolette's case, I'm convinced that their powertrain, whatever they're doing with the powertrain, is kick-ass. I think Ultraviolette has solved the idea that, oh, you have a motorcycle, you're going to want to leave the city and you want to go out, and therefore this 323 kilometers of range, and which comes down to some 200 something kilometers of range in the real world. Yes, that makes sense. But it compromises the sports bike format in a way that makes me really uneasy. And I think if they were to do a street naked, which has less of a precision requirement, it's more of a general purpose tool, you sit more comfortably, you'll forgive the fact that the seat is a little bit high and the bike is a little bit fat a lot more easily on something that is comfortable in the first place. You might be able to get the same suspension setup to be acceptable. But on a sports bike today, my standards are set high.
So it's a little bit confused in that sense because...
It's always been. I think it's a little bit less confused now.
Okay.
Lowering of the price, more dealerships are coming. This is an ambitious company. They sold, I think, 450 units last year. This year's target is 5,000 units.
Globally or India?
As far as I'm concerned, it's globally because this will be 99.8% India and 0.2% outside, as far as I'm concerned. But to scale 10 times in the space of a year with just 3 dealerships open, that's a big ask for something this expensive. So I wish them good luck, but I don't see how this will happen.
Okay. Interesting. I think maybe if they were to start designing a bike today.
Oh, I forgot about the anti-collision warning system. The most bombastic thing of this whole thing.
What?
This has anti-collision warning system.
Radar?
You see that? That's what's wrong with bombastic marketing. No, it doesn't have radar. It flashes its taillights at people.
Oh, emergency braking.
No, anti-collision warning system. ACWS, in fact.
Okay.
It also has... I don't want you to write that word in the comments just because I'm saying this thing. Please, it's not classy. But it flashes its indicators at people here and there.
What?
So you'd be sitting at a traffic light and I can see that it's 18 seconds before the light turns green. Should I disarm this motor and then rearm the motor? I won't, right? It's 18 seconds.
What is that?
It's flashing its indicators.
For what?
Motor is armed. It's warning everybody electric vehicle is there. It doesn't make any sound, but the motor is armed. I don't know why. Okay, so I was... you need the app to switch it off as far as I can tell. I can't switch it off from the menus, but if I could, I would basically disable it. I don't need this nonsense indicator flashing and thing. I don't even know if it's legal or not because I don't think you're allowed to have flashing lights on a bike unless it's an actual emergency, and an electric vehicle standing at a traffic light is not an emergency. It also has an extremely sensitive immobilizer system.
Okay.
So even when it's parked in the office, randomly it will flash its indicators and various people got annoyed with it.
That's what happened.
And the other day, I had the key in the ignition, it was off and I was trying to mount my luggage and that set off the anti-theft alarm. Then I had to switch on the bike to get the alarm to kill itself. And then I realized if I switch it off and started on the luggage, then it'll beep again. So then I had to leave the bike on while I was mounting my bags on. So on the one side, you see how careful they've been in sense of they have little nylon loops already built in for you to mount luggage easily. But on the other hand, when you start trying to use them and the bike isn't armed and switched on, then you have like a sound and light show. It's like.
Okay, you was also saying something about the app. There's some changes there. Anything
They've
significant?
updated the app. There's more features in which they have something called the Violet AI.
Okay.
Okay, not Violet. Okay, so the Violet AI's basic job is it analyzes your data, and I believe it can give you suggestions as to what you would do to ride better. Okay. So for example, if you're a very aggressive rider, it might tell you to back off a little bit. Or if you're using a lot of glide mode, it might give you suggestions on a better regen setting that will give you a more efficient way to operate the motorcycle. They also said that they are GDPR compliant in terms of your data, and it's supposed to have incognito mode, but I couldn't find it on the screen, which really annoys me now. So the Ola, for example, also didn't have incognito mode, and I don't know why Ather and Ola and Ultraviolette, etc., should have access to my riding data. So I will always first want to go into incognito mode, but on this particular Ultraviolette test bike, I couldn't, and that really bugged me. But your data is being analyzed to figure out how you could ride better. But data that is collected, it's a gray area right now until proper laws come into place.
And how Ather has that one flexi mode. What's it called?
Smart Eco.
Smart Eco. There's no such thing on this.
No. I think they will use Violet AI's data collection skills to learn how to organize and then give you a smarter glide mode. See that today it's a very conservative motorcycle. Okay. So for example, when you get to 30% of this enormous battery in ballistic, then you can no longer use ballistic. Okay. And at 30%, your range in glide mode is still showing some 100+ number. So it just doesn't compute. So on this 90-kilometer run, we left the office with 99% charge. And I admit I was riding quickly and I was out on the highway and I was training the motor. I got back to the office with, I'm going to say, 13-14% charge left. But I had spent a lot of time in combat because ballistic was off the table because I was below 30%. And then a lot of time in glide because now combat was off the table because I was below 20%. Okay. But at that point, I have 66 kilometers of range left and I am 11 kilometers from the office. It just doesn't compute. And then when you read the manual, there's a fourth mode called hover. The hover mode is non-selectable.
As limpo.
It appears and limits you to 25 kmph, gives you between 5 and 10 kilometers of range, so that when you're critically low, there's a fourth hidden mode that will get you there. So why Ultraviolette has to be so conservative, I do not understand. Okay. That night, we charged the bike back up to I think 43%, and I rode through traffic 27 kilometers to my house. It lost 2% charge overnight, being parked and whatever. And the next day when I got back, we were back to 11-12%. So I had some ballistic mode on the way home, then combat because you're below 30%. And then on the way out, I had some combat mode, and then finally had to finish my ride in glide. But the whole time, glide was saying you have 35 kilometers of range, 40 kilometers of range, but I'm only like 8 kilometers from my house. So I thought the settings were a little bit too conservative. On the other side, the app allows you to set charge limits like the new Apple iPads, etc. do. So you can say that only charge it up to 90%. And 90% means your regen is always active. Beyond 90%, there is no regen. You can set it to 80% if you feel like. And therefore, if you're not using all of the range, you can protect the battery cycles a little bit and extend the life of your battery. So on the one hand, they do these clever things. But on the other side, some of these decisions are super conservative, and I think they're not bad. I think there is an opportunity to reevaluate this, where instead of 10% SOC, you look at the range left. And the range left, and it's a reasonably accurate prediction. So the range left becomes a guide. The underlying thing in this is you should remember that let's say that Ultraviolette says that you'll get 160 kilometers in ballistic mode on a full charge. That number shows what happens if you have 100% charge and you ride 100% in ballistic mode, but you actually don't. At 70% in, it'll kick you out into combat mode. So you don't actually see those kind of numbers. So the net number of range is actually very impressive, and range anxiety was never an issue on this bike. When I was coming into the office and seeing 11-12% charge, there was such huge range numbers on my screen that I didn't even think about it. And if you add hover mode on top of that, I had tremendous amounts of range left. But it's not real in the sense of you can't use ballistic mode for 70 kilometers because you're saying 70. Before that, you will 30% and kick you out.
I think it's, in a way, I appreciate it also because it's in these kind of scenarios, I think it's better to be cautious.
Agreed. I'm saying we've seen this for the year and a half. They have 50, 60, 70, then there are 450 bikes out there. I think by now there should be enough data for them to recalibrate whether these kind of conservative numbers are really required or not.
I'm sure if they're listening, I'm sure they will.
I suspect that they're not required anymore. I suspect that because glide is very conservative, combat is much more performance, ballistic is a little bit more performance, 30-20 is not the right number. I think you can go lower and give people more space, especially because your powertrain is so good. If the thing was overheating anyway, then it would be a different thing altogether.
Okay.
That's it.
Done? Quick summary.
Go for it.
This is the Ultraviolette F77 Mach 2, and as Shumi put it, it's not version 2, it's actually version 1.0.2 or something like that. Basically, it's a revision of the original F77, and in which the tweaks are largely software based. There are some mechanical tweaks. In terms of the mechanicals, the tweaks are to the chassis, which needed more stiffness so that it would feel more predictable through the corners, to build a sense of sportiness, which has still not happened, but it has become more predictable. In terms of software, there are changes. There is some change to the battery. We think it's mostly the software, in which the 20 additional kilometers have been unlocked in terms of the overall range. The other big change is now regen modes have gone from 3 to 10. There are 10 levels of regen, in which 10 is like, as Shumi said, engine braking. It's hard, the nose dives, and he found a sweet spot at 7, 8. Between those two he could find something, whereas 1 and 2 comes down to basically freewheeling and coasting easily. So the regen modes sound like a lot, the levels, but they are actually functional, helpful, and you can toggle through them on the fly, and it's not too much of a hassle on the left hand side cubes. In terms of performance, it's the same as before. There's really no change on that front. In terms of riding, the big change is in terms of how it feels in corners. It's not a big change, let me clarify, but it is an improvement which makes it feel more predictable and still not sporty. And that is the crux of this motorcycle, that it's a blunt instrument, as Shumi put it, rather than a precision instrument, what you would like from a sporty looking motorcycle like this. As before, it comes with a 3.3 kilowatt charger as an option, which is a fairly large charger, but it can get it up to 80% in 2.5 hours or thereabouts. And now Ultraviolette has set up Supernova, which is their charging network.
That's what a supernova does.
So there are a few charging stations outside of Pune and Bengaluru where you can go and charge, which is outside the city, these charging points, so you can travel with the bike a bit more. The biggest point being that in terms of range, this motorcycle is healthy with over 300 kilometers of claimed range, and in all the time that Shumi rode, that range anxiety was really not an issue. And through the 3 ride modes that you have, ballistic is, as before, properly quick. The only concern that Shumi had with regards to the modes was that they are a bit conservative in which way they work as to the battery SOC, how they're related to the battery SOC. You can use the ballistic mode till the battery comes down to 30%. After that, you're in combat mode, and in combat mode, it's still quick, which then gets capped down to the glide mode, which is the mildest mode, when you come down to 20%. And the reason why that felt weird to him was because when you come to glide mode at 20% of battery charge, suddenly you have, what, 60 kilometers?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So you suddenly realize that you still have so much range remaining, and you could have ridden faster and had more fun. And in terms of performance, in terms of the battery, how predictable the bike feels, it felt really enjoyable. Like, clearly he was smiling and saying it felt satisfying. And one of the things that he pointed out about the ride experience and why it feels predictable is how it communicates with you in terms of the how hot the motor has gotten. So there are 3 levels. So it tells you when it's kind of warm, a little bit hotter, and hot. So as a rider, you're getting that information, so you can tailor your riding and nurse the motorcycle back to peak performance. So green, gray, and
gray is off.
Gray
so green, orange, and red.
Green, orange, and red. So that clearly indicates to you how hot the motor is, and therefore you can ride accordingly and help the motorcycle work better. So that's great in terms of how the entire electrics of the bike work. The throttle, the regen is great. That is the high point of this motorcycle. Even in terms of quality, Ultraviolette has improved the perception of quality in the motorcycle clearly, even if it is, I mean, we asked for a benchmark from Shumi, and he said it's maybe 10-15% behind a KTM 390 Duke today, and which is a very high level today. So it's definitely move in the right direction. So overall, as a motorcycle, this is an improved Ultraviolette F77? Is it recasting itself as a more appealing sport bike? Not really, but it is a better F77 than before. The biggest factor for me that got my attention here was that it's had a price reduction, which has dropped by 1 lakh for the two variants. There's a 7 kilowatt hour variant and a 10 kilowatt hour variant, and both of them have had their prices slashed by a lakh of rupees to 3 lakhs and 4 lakhs, which means they're still pretty expensive. And the one thing that I missed out on is that now it gets traction control, which is a very simple kind of system. It doesn't have an IMU, but using the wheel speed sensors for the ABS system, and it's an electric, so they can do the intervention for traction control quite easily, which they have adopted and is useful for a motorcycle of this nature, and especially the weight as well. That's the other factor. It has massive battery packs, especially the 10 kilowatt hour version that we use, and you can always feel the weight. That doesn't quite disappear, whether it's in the straights, over the bumps, or through the corners. The good thing is, despite the weight, over bigger bumps, it'll take the hits nicely, but because the aggressive seating position, it's not like that it's distancing you from that experience. You will feel the bumps. If it were a more upright seating motorcycle, it would feel more natural. The ergonomics of it will be a bit strange because it's wide, so when you ride hard, it will feel like a big motorcycle. You sit a bit further away, so the sense of connection will be a little bit delayed. And because of the really small swing arm at the rear, the way it can absorb bumps and the way it'll do stuff will not be very sophisticated. It's a quick but blunt instrument.
No, that's it. What I remembered while you were doing the summary is that the weight transfer affects ABS quite a lot. So this is a Bosch tuned system, blah, blah, blah. All the hardware is there. But basically, if you get surprised by somebody and you hit the brake, you're almost immediately in ABS. Because it's a lot of weight coming over the suspension, then the contact patch has to flatten and grip has to be generated by, then ABS is on.
Okay.
And there is no, I mean, it works, but there's no precision in that process.
Okay.
Like when you ride a bike a long distance, you hit the brake here, you can get a sense of this is how the ABS will come in, this is what the calibration is about. The Ultraviolette's like instant ABS on. Because there is just no time, and the fork is not sophisticated enough, so it basically collapses and says, I give up, and then ABS comes in and says, I'll save you. But in the process, you're not feeling very good about this process because you're like, I could easily have braked for this without this dramatic ABS intervention. But because it is so dramatic, I think you need the ABS also to be there.
Okay.
Right? So this is why I keep coming back to the same thing. I think they should have done a street bike. On a street bike, some of these things you would say it's not that precise role of format, and therefore that would be okay. And it's the fact that they keep saying this is a sport bike, and all the imagery is like that. I think that's the problem.
I think they chose, I mean, given everything that you're talking about, how the naming and everything is all about high performance and sounding exciting, and which is why they started with the format of the RC390 as the base, and that's what's holding it back today. If this were built to be a bigger bike, if it were built to be a standard, a sit-up bike, a lot of these things would be taken care of.
Or if they'd gone all the way to the deep end and said, screw it, we'll build an ADV. Then I have no lack of space. It is a large motorcycle. I have to put longer and larger suspension units on it. And then if you take a ADV, put this kind of range on it and all of that, then it is not automatically like a weird thing. It's touring oriented. It has great suspension. It'll give you ground clearance. It's too heavy to do off-roading, so let's ignore that. But you'll get a fundamental touring platform that works, and then Supernova charges, etc. Everything plugs into place.
I think ADV would be too big of a promise. I think a standard, I mean, a naked would be the way to go, because you can make those changes quickly. I mean, they can make those changes because with the ADV, my expectation automatically is that it should have more agility, which will be a problem.
No chance.
Right. And I will want to travel more, in which case 300 kilometers, or, let's say if it's 200 kilometers real world, and 200 kilometers.
The Bengaluru riders will say, listen, forget traveling. If you can just do the speed breakers and potholes, we're in a good place.
If you want a city ADV, yeah, okay, then it'll click.
Okay. As we sign out, I'm going to say there's one way in which the Ultraviolet is utterly unforgettable. If anything has 24, 36 logos all over the motorcycle, it has to be unforgettable.
No way.
Yeah, it is full stickering everywhere. On the side stand side, it doesn't say much, but on the other side, it says stand clear, which is what you'd put in front of an aircraft engine because you don't want to get sucked into it or whatever. So there'll be stand. So it's there. Then it has airstrike here and F77 there and version 2.0, and it's a bit much.
It's a custom from the factory, man. And
No, no,
stickers
no.
are the best way to.
No, Kartik, there is a fine line in there, right? You remember back in the whatever 80s, 90s when the Japanese sports bikes were like and so much color on it, right? You remember the Fox-Eye Fireblade with the orange and purple? That there was a time for that, and we appreciated it, and then it slowly tapered down to much cleaner forms now, right? This has those clean forms, and the paints look good now, and all of that, right? And there's like little sticker everywhere, and you're like,
And talking about cluttery, the instrument cluster, it's more cluttered than before. It has two layouts. I've forgotten the names of the
radar and parallax.
Yeah, radar and parallax. They
You're,
are
you're
not
lucky
easy.
they're not calling it Fox 1 and Fox 2, which is missiles.
Oh, okay.
I think it's two hard points, and when you release from one hard point, you say Fox 1, and you release from the other hard point, you say Fox 2.
Alrighty then. Cool. So that's my not so short summary of the Ultraviolette F77 Mach 2. Anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about the ultraviolet, please do leave us a comment. We'll try and get you as many answers as we can. And I know that we're not going to be able to air this, but if you have a fighter jet that goes for a sortie and doesn't fire any of the missiles, then what is its status?
Point blank.
No Fox given.
All right, nicely done.